Hello, I'm Rick Anthony, and this is CaregiverAssist, a series of 30-minute episodes of, by, and for unpaid family caregivers. In each episode, we talk with experts in the field and men and women who are or have been family caregivers. A few weeks ago, a friend of mine asked me when my family and I first noticed that my wife was having memory issues, and when we felt it was worrisome enough to seek professional help. As I recounted my story, he said, "That's beginning to sound familiar," referring to memory problems his wife, a retired PhD professor, was having. That experience was one of the several I've had with friends who were hoping that their memory issues or those of their spouses could be chalked up to having too many birthdays. It was one of my daughters who urged me to take Marlene's seemingly innocuous behavior seriously and to get help. And that was the beginning of an epic journey of frustration, despair, anger, helplessness, and hopelessness. I believe Alzheimer's and dementia have taken their place as two of the scariest words in our vocabulary, right up there with cancer. My initial reaction was fright as I realized how much I didn't know about dementia. And so I scrambled for expert counsel on what to expect and what could be done for my wife. First lesson, there is no cure for dementia. Second lesson, depending upon the type and stage and other factors, the disease can define the life of the afflicted and their caregivers for years. My experience and that of others I know was the impetus for this episode of Caregiver Assist. With me today to discuss Alzheimer's, dementia, and the differences between is Jenny Davis, who is an advocate for Alzheimer's, the Alzheimer's Association. She'll explain what that means. She's also a nurse practitioner with Penn. And what else are you? That's close enough. Welcome.
Thank you.
First of all, thank you for your service in the nursing profession.
Oh, thank you.
With those who are ill and those who are dying. It's a noble profession.
Thank you.
What is an advocate? What is your role with the Alzheimer's Association?
So my primary advocacy is with the Alzheimer's Impact Movement. We advocate for increased funding for research, to have a better understanding of the disease itself, as well as research into treatments. And we additionally advocate for public policy for the betterment of all the lives of those impacted by Alzheimer's and other dementias.
Is the government, in your judgment, is the government now paying more attention to Alzheimer's and dementia? Because for so many years it was in the backwater, where everybody talked about it, nobody wanted to talk about it. But it seems now, maybe partly as a result of the pandemic, when we're more aware of people with dementia and the need for caregivers to take care of them.
I think a lot of the progress in awareness and policy is with the advocacy work, and not just advocates such as myself, but also people within the walls of Congress and those that have also been impacted by Alzheimer's and other dementias, and taking their experience to Congress and for policy, knowing how difficult.
Is the Alzheimer's Association an advocacy group, or is it largely education and helping families who have a member who has Alzheimer's? So
the Alzheimer's Impact Movement is the advocacy, the affiliate of the Alzheimer's Association. Mm-hmm. So the Alzheimer's Association, as far as bringing education, awareness, different resources.
Jenny, I could be wrong, but it seems to me there's an awful lot of confusion about what is Alzheimer's, what is dementia, different types of dementia. Again, it was all new to me, and I found myself having to learn it very, very quickly, and I still don't understand all of it. I read that Alzheimer's is a disease, dementia and the forms of dementia, not a disease. Please help unscramble all of that.
Yes, so dementia is more of the umbrella term for the disability of cognitive impairment that interrupt daily life and independence. Alzheimer's is a type of dementia that accounts for 60 to 70% of cases of dementia worldwide. So it is the most common type of dementia.
So it's a continuum. Dementia there are different types of dementia.
There's, yes, different types, and you can have more than one type, which would be then mixed dementia.
Oh, you can?
So my mom had both vascular dementia and Alzheimer's.
That's what I forgot to point out. You're also a caregiver. The most important part.
I was, yes.
So you experienced it, you know. Yeah. And your mother passed about a year ago?
About a year ago, yeah. August of last year.
My wife is coming up in just about a year. It's tough, isn't it?
Yes, I've had a very difficult year in my grief.
Yeah, yep. Okay, now that we figured out what dementia is and what Alzheimer's is, now just in the area of dementia, there are several types of dementia. But as you said, someone could have multiple types of dementia. My wife had vascular dementia. And well, that's a whole other story. But she was diagnosed with vascular dementia. She had high blood pressure, which I guess was a contributory factor, and some other things. But could you just generally explain the different types of dementia?
So generally, with dementia and the differentiation, that there are a variety of diseases that cause damage to the brain cells. And that impacts the ability for the brain cells to communicate with one another, to have resulting cognitive function. That process that damages the brain cells differentiates the type of dementia.
So in the case of vascular dementia, I assume the brain isn't getting enough oxygen.
It affects the vasculature, yes, within the brain cells, like micro bleeding of the vessels that lead to that. And
as I said, so far as I know and everything I've been told, there is no cure for any form of dementia.
Correct.
We're still struggling to understand what causes it, because there could be multiple causes.
Correct? Yes.
But the research that's being done seems to be promising, at least from the headlines you read from time to time. And I was listening to the radio the other day, forgive me, my allergies are kicking up, listening to the radio, and there was an experimental program with a band of some kind that they put on your head, and it's an electric current. And they were looking for volunteers to participate in the experimental project. And I'd never heard of that before. I know that there are other applications of this kind of electrical stimulation. Have you ever heard of something like that?
No, I've not heard of that. There is a lot of research, though, being done. And I know the Alzheimer's Association actually has a link to clinical trials that are taking place to see if there's a match for those. But the research and knowledge base has been evolving. I think we've made great progress in regards to that in treatments.
Is there a worst kind of dementia?
Anyone that I guess you're personally dealing with?
Well, I guess that's true. Whatever it is you have, that's the worst.
Yeah, I think, different people have different resources, different family dynamics, because it doesn't just impact the person living with the disease, right? It affects the whole family.
In conversations I've had with medical professionals and so on, and I mentioned Lewy body, I said, oh, that's the worst kind.
I don't know to say one is,
okay. Well, at least the people who have lived with it and through it certainly have told me it's the worst kind. And from anecdotal information I've had from other people. My wife was apparently in the early stages, so she wasn't exhibiting some of the other behavioral issues that I've read about. That have to be another friend of ours. For 3 years, his behavior was just so erratic. It was his poor wife and family. They didn't know what to do with him. And you don't want to institutionalize your loved one. Again, a friend of mine said he would never institutionalize his wife. But it got so bad, and he felt that he couldn't help her, so he had to institutionalize her. I hate that word.
I was going to say, I feel like my mom did live at the end of her life in memory care, and it was more to put her in a place that was safe and really supported her to the best of our ability and her family,
Sure.
Especially during the pandemic. So I wouldn't, institutionalized.
It's so expensive.
Mm-hmm.
Thank God we didn't have to incur the kind of expense I've heard about other people. But I read that on average, the annual cost to care for someone with dementia is almost $360,000. That's all in.
Yes, it's expensive. I know memory care is completely out of pocket, and it's very expensive.
Yes.
With very few amenities to that cost.
Yeah.
So to even be able in a position to afford it, I was there almost every single day, despite paying a large sum, in order for my mom to have the optimal care that she needed.
Yeah. When you were looking for a memory care center, what were the criteria? You're a professional, you're a nurse. What were you looking for in finally deciding which of the several that are available was the best for your mother?
So it was a combination, things non-medical or, as far as proximity to me, because, I would be going there frequently. But knowing that those living with Alzheimer's benefit from things like as far as activities, having that socialization, so having different programs available within the facility, having things that, the environment, safety, and also having things that would trigger the memory, so that having those, environments that would bring that back to them. Having the ability to have someone oversee as far as with medical care, and being able to work with the facility as far as managing her care, because I was very active in that.
In your opinion, as a professional, what should the ratio be of staff to patient in a memory care center?
I don't know the exact number. I'd say it's better than what it is. And they don't have actually in memory care a standard set. So like say is like a skilled nursing facility where they do have those ratios, do not in memory care. And we were often in a position where they were understaffed at my mom's facility, and I was there and almost felt like I had to step in.
So she was there during the pandemic.
Yes, which was part of the reason we really felt like she needed that. She declined, and so many other people, I'm sure, with dementia declined during the pandemic, not having that socialization, different activities with other people. And so we got to that point.
Weren't you locked out during the pandemic?
There was a brief period. We got to do visits. And then even when she ended up getting COVID, we had to do window visits during that time. I think a day after she actually was diagnosed with COVID, I actually got my first vaccine. And so a few months later, I was then fully vaccinated, and she then had recently had the disease. So then I was able to take her out again. So I did take her out often to stay with me, despite being there. So,
and again, from what I've read, I'm not sure there's an adequate answer to this, but we'll try. Is Alzheimer's and dementia, are they preventable?
There are no known true ways to prevent it. The research is evolving, but there are different risk factors that the research has shown as far as possible modifications in lifestyle that could decrease your risk of developing dementia.
For example?
So, like you talk about as far as like blood pressure control, being active, diet, eating healthy, those kind of things.
Just common sense, that would apply to anything. to prevent any disease, I guess. But I guess I was looking for something. And obesity is another condition that I think is a contributory factor to Alzheimer's and dementia.
I'm not familiar with that as
just from what I've read. And certainly lifestyle. But again, it's so crazy, Jenny. A doctor friend of ours, an orthopedic surgeon, a prominent orthopedic surgeon, played golf. Mind was still active. People used to say, keep your mind active. Do things, do puzzles, play cards, do something, keep your mind. He did all that thing. He was a brilliant man. Yeah. And one day he couldn't find his way home.
So that's what I say as far as reducing risk, but there's no way to prevent it.
No.
Yeah. At this time.
At this time. Okay. Another friend of mine who is the head of a senior facility, who's been into technology most of his life, and he's been in healthcare for 40 years. And he's doing some really interesting things in the memory unit with seniors as well, but also in the memory unit. He's bringing robots in to the facility to do nothing more at this point than to socialize with patients. And with the algorithms that they have in AI, the more exposure the robot has to the patient, and they have some conversation, the more he gets to know the patient, so can come in and say, how you doing? How any better than yesterday? Yeah. That kind of thing.
I think that's great. I see, or I saw in memory care, I think the Alzheimer's and dementia can be very isolating, and people can fall out of your life when you're faced with that diagnosis and disease, and having that opportunity to really converse with people and to feel part of a group, it's so important. I felt my mom sometimes really missed that, and losing some of her friends, and I definitely brought her everywhere with me for years, and she was part of my group, and we created our own group. So I think that having that socialization and having that conversing with whatever level of language and ability to communicate that they have is so important.
Oh, the isolation is not only for the person afflicted, but for the caregiver.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because the caregiver is isolated as well.
Yes, I felt that myself. Yeah.
Yeah. What was your experience as a caregiver, and how did you manage it? Were you working full time at the time?
Yes. I worked
as a nurse.
A nurse practitioner, yeah. Through the pandemic. Yes, I managed my one other of my sisters, and I before my mom went to memory care, she would go back and forth and between our two houses. I made a very deliberate decision at one point in her disease process that I was going to dedicate myself completely to my mom. So outside of work, my time was dedicated to her. I felt that was necessary to help her not just live with the disease, but to thrive. And our, constantly coming up with ways to engage her, to communicate with her, to bring out the beautiful smile that she had. So it was very difficult. And it was you constantly had to be shifting, adapting, modifications to the home and to the situation. And this is from youngish, able-bodied. It was difficult. Physically, emotionally, mentally taxing. And it took a major toll on me, but also the greatest honor of my entire life is caring for my mom.
In the work you do now, do you talk with groups of caregivers?
I don't lead any support groups. I have done some volunteering as far as giving information out. I often, I guess I talk about it all the time, that I run it, meet people and have conversations. Knowing how difficult it is, I like to talk to people about it all the time to make sure that they're supported and don't feel so isolated. So,
again, just from my reading and become a student of this, it shocked me. There are two things shocked me. One, there are 53 million unpaid family caregivers in this country and growing, almost exponentially.
Yeah.
Because older population, multiple morbidities, etc. And that we're hitting a crisis if we're not already
We
there.
are, yeah. I'd say it is a crisis, yes.
And the other thing that was interesting to me is, maybe it was because of Marlene's condition, but it seemed to me that dementia and Alzheimer's were much more pervasive than I had originally thought. Every other person seemed to have somebody with or knew somebody who had in the family. And yet, there are only, what, 6-7 million people with Alzheimer's and dementia. Maybe the number is a bit bigger than that. Nonetheless, a relatively small percentage of the total population of 350 million people in this country. That surprised me as well. Everybody's talking about it, but there are it's not as pervasive as cancer. Thank God, not yet. But it just this anomaly that everybody seemed to have it and talk about it, and yet the national numbers, aren't as large as you would think.
Well, I think...
I'm not sure I'm making myself clear, but...
No, I do. But I think that, as I had said before, the impact is not just the person living with the disease. It's their caregivers. It often takes more than one caregiver.
Yeah.
So that impact is deeply felt and more widespread in that sense. And then you talk about with the unpaid caregivers, that impact in society, as far as being able to work, sick time, I think. So it's not just the person living with the disease as the patient, it's also the family or loved ones. And I think in dealing with something so difficult as Alzheimer's or other dementias, that you do find people also going through it. So you find your people, and I feel like do have conversations about it.
Oh.
So,
since you are a professional, were the early manifestations of dementia clear to you, or did you go through that period as I and most other people do, not quite sure what it is, and just kind of chalking it off to, as I said, old age? I would say to my daughter would call me and say, "Mom's not right, something's wrong." And then she was writing checks and she was getting them all messed up, and so we had to stop that. And that's when I started paying attention to it. But my daughters noticed it long before I did. But that's my point. I didn't see it. They did.
So we knew that something was wrong. We didn't know what process that we were dealing with. My mom actually sought a medical opinion on that, which oftentimes those living with the disease may not. And like I said, she went to a neurologist, and they initially diagnosed her with depression and anxiety. But as her disease did progress, she knew that something was wrong. So we did seek a second opinion. But we didn't know what was going on. There possibly could be some denials. I feel could be part of it.
Yes.
But also, not understanding. I think there are a lot of people also not understanding as far as the degree of cognitive impairment that is not a natural aging process. I think there's more awareness in that, but
Is depression, anxiety, and so on, are those precursors to dementia, or are they part of dementia?
I'm not aware of it as a precursor. Living with dementia, I can see how one may have depression, anxiety, and like I said, not just the person living with the disease, but also their family and friends. So it can be a component, sometimes maybe even overlooked, the depression and anxiety throughout the process too.
There is no cure.
Correct.
But there are some medications that are available, as I understand it.
Correct.
And in my case, when I talked to our physician, a great guy. I really love him. I said, what about some of these therapies that are available? And he's very pragmatic. He said, yes, we could try that. But he said, Rick, why would you want to? Why would you want to prolong this? You may want to do it for your own selfish reasons, but why would you want to prolong it? Why not let it take its natural course? And I think there was some wisdom in that. It seemed cold and calculated, callous at the time. But as I reflected on it, I think I understood what he meant. How do you feel about that?
So the treatments, so initial medications that were available in Alzheimer's and dementia were more as far as addressing symptoms of the disease and improving the current cognition, but nothing that would slow the progress until more recently. These newer FDA-approved medications that are really more be recommended for early stages. So they are to slow the progression to actually have that independence longer. So that's what they're currently, as far as looking at. I think, having those conversations, it's all a matter just of any kind of conversation as far as in care, what's people's desires and how to achieve that.
In your advocacy work, when you go to Harrisburg or Washington or any other capital, and you want more money, that's what you're asking for, more money for research. But to what end? To prevent it? To cure it? To treat it? What do you want to do with the money? What do you want the researchers to do? All of the above?
Well, as far as a cure in dementia, there's multiple different disease processes going on. So, I think in the more immediate future is really looking for solid treatments that, and having the ability to diagnose sooner. So there are, research that's coming out of ways to detect Alzheimer's, even things with like a finger prick, so to have that earlier diagnosis, to then delay that initial cognitive impairments so that you can live independently, because that's really, would be the goal, to have your life and the decisions and making along your life. So I think that in the more immediate future, it is looking at those treatments, better understanding of the disease, as well as treatments.
The memory centers and the things that preceded them really haven't changed over the years. They used to call them lockdowns and those kinds of things, mostly to protect people from themselves. But is there a better way? Well, right now, I hate to use the word, but we seem to warehouse these people, our loved ones, and provide the best support that is available right now. But it's got to be a better way.
So I think there's a lot of progress, and they're better than what they once were. But I think we have a long way to go. At multiple levels.
You saw it professionally as well as a caregiver. And as a daughter.
That's lacking.
I think what we have confirmed is there is a lot we don't know, a lot more to be learned, and that caregiving is really tough, and we need more help for caregivers.
Yes, and that's a lot of the advocacy surrounds that.
Not enough, not nearly enough. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
My guest today on Caregiver Assist has been Jenny Davis, who is a nurse practitioner. She was a caregiver for her late mother. She is an advocate for, on behalf of the Alzheimer's Association of Delaware County, I think it is. Until then, my name is Rick Anthony. This is Caregiver Assist. Take very good care of yourselves.